I moved to Bellwether 3 years ago, after my mother died. It wasn't a plan so much as momentum. Her house was paid off, and I didn't have anywhere else to go. Bellwether is the kind of town where drivers wave even when they don't know you, where the diner remembers your order, even if you've only been in once. I took work wherever I could, mostly substitute teaching. Sometimes weekend shifts at the library when the high school was short. No one asked much. They liked that I showed up. I liked that they didn't dig. There's a hush here, a quiet that settles behind curtains. Half the houses sit empty. The rest belong to people who have hardened into routine. Church Sundays, groceries Wednesdays, yard work until the first frost, then silence until spring. Sometimes I think Bellwether is a snow globe someone shook years ago. The glitter has long since fallen. We're just sitting in the stillness, pretending it's still pretty. That's why the painting felt so wrong. The town's art competition was held in the converted church hall, same space for weddings, funerals, polling days, bake sales. If the light hit just right, you could still see the ghost of the old crucifix on the far wall, bleached where sun used to fall before someone covered it in beige. I wasn't meant to judge. I filled in because the usual guy had shingles. And someone remembered I taught high school art for 1 semester before the budget got slashed. They said I had a good eye, which was their polite way of saying I'm quiet and don't argue. Most entries were what you'd expect. Oil landscapes that looked like they followed the same tutorial. Watercolor dogs with faces melting into paper. A kid brought a clay sculpture that collapsed in the box on the way in. I liked that one best. At least it didn't pretend. Then I saw the butterfly. It hadn't been there earlier. Maybe someone slipped it in during the bustle. It hung dead center. No frame, no label, just canvas and a butterfly against a blank white void. I've seen photorealism, hyperrealism, surreal work that tricks the eye. This wasn't just convincing. It felt alive in the worst way, like the butterfly had been pinned there while still breathing, and the instant the brush touched it, it forgot how. Wings spread wide, blue so deep it made black look noisy. The body had texture that pulled old words up in my mind: velvet, bone, oil, things I hadn't said in years. Behind it, nothing. Not background, not air. Just white, like the idea of a canvas rather than a surface. People started crying. Not all at once, not all of them, but enough that the room changed. Sniffling behind me, a woman covering her mouth. Even the mayor, the one who always made a point of announcing he did get art, stood with his hat in his hands, nodding as if he'd been spoken to. I stood in front of it for 10, maybe 15 minutes, trying to feel what everyone else was feeling. Nothing came. I wasn't moved. I wasn't shaken. I felt outside the moment, like everyone had received instructions I'd missed. Eventually, I muttered something: incredible work, or nice piece. I don't even remember, and drifted toward the refreshment table just to breathe. That's when I noticed Alice. She was a few feet from the painting. Pale, maybe 17. Hoodie sleeves stretched long over her hands, scuffed trainers. She didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the butterfly like she'd forgotten how to blink. I watched too long. At first, I thought she might be asleep standing up. Then I thought she might be crying. She was doing neither. She stared with an expression I'd seen on a man at his wife's funeral. Not grief exactly, more like reverence. Like something ancient was ending, and she'd finally accepted it. I cleared my throat as I approached. "Hey, you okay?" She blinked, slow. Then she looked at me, really looked, and said, almost to herself, "I didn't know it could feel like this. I thought I missed my chance." Then she turned back to the butterfly, and I stood there, empty-handed, with nothing to say. After the art show, the town felt lighter. That's the only word for it. Like someone had loosened a knot in everyone's chest while they slept. People who'd avoided each other for years started talking again. I saw the Whitcomb brothers hugging in the middle of Main Street, like one of them had come home from war. Mrs. Halpin carried a pie to her ex-husband's porch, and he cried until she held him. The Hendersons, who'd barely spoken since Christmas, walked the grocery aisles hand in hand, smiling like teenagers. Everything softened. It was as if the town had been rinsed in warm water. Kindness spread fast and quiet, less like flowers opening, and more like mold creeping through drywall, everywhere before you notice it. But it didn't touch me. I kept waiting for the feeling to catch up, for clarity or relief to land in my chest, the way it seemed to land in everyone else. Instead, it passed through me like I was glass. Even Jacob changed, and he's as stubborn as they come. I stopped by the garage one afternoon and found him lounging in a lawn chair outside the bay doors, eyes closed, smiling up at the sky like someone was telling him a private story. "Hey," I said, nudging his boot. "You all right?" He blinked like I'd woken him. "Never better," he said. "Feels good, like something finally broke loose." "What did?" I asked. He just laughed, small, private, like I'd missed the punchline. When I asked about the painting, he smiled again. It was something, wasn't it? His gaze slid past me, as if something across the street had called his name. I turned. There was nothing. I walked home hollow. It wasn't the painting anymore. It was me. Why hadn't I felt anything? What was wrong with me that I could look at that butterfly, whatever it was, and feel absolutely nothing? That question stayed with me. Later that evening, after a PTA meeting, I was locking up the school when I heard footsteps in the hall. Alice appeared in the same hoodie, the same distant stare, except now her cheeks were flushed and her eyes shimmered the way half the town's did. She stopped in front of me, breathing hard like she'd run the whole way. "I didn't think you would choose me," she whispered. Her hands shook, but she wasn't frightened, more like she was overflowing. "Who?" I asked. She glanced past me toward the doorway. Another girl stood there, tall, blonde, one of the basketball kids, staring into the dim corridor with that same softened, dreamlike calm. Alice didn't answer. She didn't need to. She smiled, small, trembling, and said again, "I didn't think it would choose me." That's when I began to see the gaps, blank measures in a song everyone else knew. People spoke in low, tender voices, as if they were sharing something holy. But sometimes I'd catch someone watching from a distance, unmoved, out of step. Like me, the first was the man in the rusted car behind the hardware store. I'd seen him plenty, one of those fixtures you stop noticing. He never begged, never approached. He just sat in the front seat of a sun-bleached Buick, windows fogged from the inside, watching the world go by. After the painting, Bellwether softened like overripe fruit, but he didn't change. He stayed there, a statue in denim and dust. Once I walked close enough to catch his eyes through the glass. He stared straight ahead, unblinking, like he was waiting for a signal only he could hear. I lifted a hand in an awkward half-wave. He didn't wave back. Then there was Mrs. Laurie, the widow who walked the cemetery each morning before dawn. Same path, same 3 stones, her husband, her son, and a name I didn't recognize. I watched her from my kitchen window, dark coat trailing like smoke, hands buried in her sleeves. After the butterfly, I waited to see her soften too, to see her pause and smile at strangers. She didn't. She moved the same way, slow, ritual. She never looked up. One morning, I tried to meet her on the path and offered coffee in a paper cup. She didn't take it. She looked at me like I was interrupting a conversation I couldn't hear. And then there was Nathan at the post office. Usually polite, brisk, dry as toast. Everyone knew his story. Alone his whole life, never found anyone in a town this small. In the week after the painting, while couples danced barefoot in the park and strangers confessed decades of buried affection, Nathan still walked his route with mail clamped to his chest, jaw tight as if he was keeping something from spilling out. For a moment, I thought we might share something like veterans who never fought the same war, but recognized the same look. I tried once, a throwaway comment about how strange everything had gotten. He paused, nodded once, and walked away. The others didn't talk much either, not beyond what was necessary. I started wondering if that's how I'd looked since I arrived, thinking I was simply keeping to myself, when really I might have been just as sour as the rest of the unchosen. I kept turning it over. Coincidence or a pattern? Were we all missing the same simple thing, some small organ of feeling everyone else had? One morning, I saw Mrs. Laurie sitting in the church pews. She wasn't praying. She faced the blank wall where the painting had been displayed. I sat a few rows behind her and let the silence stretch until it hurt. "Why aren't you like the others?" I asked quietly. She didn't turn around. Her gaze lifted a little toward a ceiling beam. "Because," she said, soft and plain, "there's no one left for me. No bitterness. Not even sadness. Just fact." And the empty place in my chest went colder. It started with the lights. Around midnight, I looked out my window and saw people on their porches, faces lit by candles that hadn't been in their hands a moment earlier. The first group I saw, 6 of them, walked single file down Main Street. They didn't speak. They hummed something low and wordless, not a tune I knew. It sounded like a memory, passed from mouth to mouth. The next night, there were more. Couples holding hands, parents with children, teenagers moving as if they'd practiced the steps years ago in a school auditorium and had suddenly remembered the choreography. They didn't look possessed. That's what kept snagging in my mind. No glassy eyes, no convulsions, no struggle, They looked grateful, calm, as if they were doing exactly what they were made to do. Alice was among them. She walked barefoot through the grass, arms loose, face lifted to the stars like she expected to be taken any second. She looked so alive it hurt to watch. Some nights I followed at a distance, far enough to pretend I wasn't spying. They never looked back. On the fourth night, I saw the dancers. In the middle of the town square, under a lamppost, a man and a woman turned slowly in the pool of light. They held each other so close you couldn't tell whose feet led. The man's shirt was soaked. I thought rain until I saw the dark track down from his eye. Blood, slow and steady, like a tear that had grown tired. No one reacted. People passed without blinking. One man clapped as if it were a performance. That's when I started writing everything down, not to document it, but to stay sane. Dates, names, times, numbers, what they did, how long it lasted. The more I tried to map it, the less it held, like tracing smoke with a pencil. I took my notes and theories to the authorities. The sheriff listened and then stared through me, wearing the same soft smile as everyone else. What made me furious was how sincere it was. He wasn't mocking me. He was simply gone. Nothing added up. I stopped writing and started watching. One night, I saw Alice alone at the edge of the pond, her reflection trembling in the water. I walked over. She looked up and smiled, gentle, worn out. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. Her smile didn't shift. She rose like she was moving through warm water and reached out to touch my cheek. Not pity, something closer to apology. "It must be so lonely," she whispered, "to have no one worth blooming for." Then she walked into the dark, leaving me still unsure whether she'd meant to comfort me or mourn me. I went back to the church to find Mrs. Laurie. I don't know why. Maybe because she was the only one who answered me without that knowing smile. Maybe because I still believed, stupidly, that a few of us were left, unchanged, sane. The doors were open. Candles lined the pews like centuries. Wax had dripped onto hymn books no one read. Mrs. Laurie sat in her usual spot, spine straight, hands folded. I sat beside her, close enough to hear the quiet creak of her breath. She didn't look at me, not at first. She stared at the far wall. "What is it?" I asked. "What does it want?" She smiled. That was the first sign something had gone wrong. It wasn't her old emptiness. It was radiant, lit from within, the way the others looked once it touched them. "It finds what still aches," she whispered, so softly I almost missed it. "That's all it needs. A wound you've gotten used to carrying." Her cadence had changed too, as if her voice had been tuned to music I couldn't hear. She finally turned to me. For a moment, I thought she might take my hand. Instead, she said, "You never learned how to ache, did you?" Then she stood, graceful, and walked up the center aisle, fingers brushing each pew as if counting beads. She defound the ache, and I was alone again, alone enough that I couldn't even trust the silence I'd shared with her. After that, the others like me thinned out. The man in the Buick vanished. His car sat empty, driver's door left ajar, as if he'd stepped out for a second and forgotten where he meant to go. Nathan closed the post office early 3 days in a row. one complained. Once I stopped by and saw him through the back window, holding something small, and I couldn't shake the sense that it looked like a weapon. I kept wandering like a tourist in my own life, watching and listening, wondering if it was too late to be chosen, wondering if I'd missed some subtle invitation that had passed through everyone else's blood. One night I sat at the edge of the park, just beyond the lights. Couples walked barefoot through grass. Teenagers sat in circles, heads bowed, foreheads pressed together. Quiet songs threaded the air, not full melodies, just harmonies rising and falling with the breeze. I tried to mimic it. I imagined someone sitting beside me. I tried to picture what it might feel like to have a memory that hurt in that beautiful, terrible way. Nothing. It was like trying to start a fire with wet wood. Later, at the cafe, I ran into Maya. I hadn't seen her in years, not since she'd graduated. She used to draw quiet, strange things that made other students uneasy. She was older now, steadier, but still carried that look like she was 5 seconds ahead of the rest of us. She offered me a seat. We talked lightly, then slower, and somewhere in the middle, I told her everything, not just the painting and the processions, but the hollowness, the way I'd been watching from the outside like a man pressing his face to the glass of a house he used to live in. She listened, really listened. Then she looked at me with something like sympathy, something like pity. "I think you want to be in love," she said, "but you never learned how." I didn't argue. She sipped her coffee, set it down, and added, "And I think you don't want to be alone when it happens." "When what happens?" I asked. She didn't answer. She only looked out the window at the pairs, walking under amber streetlight. Faces lifted toward a sky I hadn't been able to look at directly in days. Bellwether wasn't quiet anymore, not the old kind of quiet. The forgotten town stillness, where dust settles on windshields and dogs bark at nothing. Now, the silence felt deliberate, sacred, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next note in a song they'd only heard in dreams. People started looking up more. At first, it was subtle, heads tilted slightly toward the clouds, as if something faint was humming overhead. Then they began sitting in fields at night, eyes wide, mouths parted. Couples lay naked on blankets, fingers threaded, whispering things I couldn't hear. They said they were ready. I found drawings carved into tree bark, crude spirals, insect wings, symbols like musical notation that followed no rhythm I knew. Behind the library, someone had stacked bones into a perfect spiral, bird bones, maybe squirrels, maybe something that once spoke. Windows were left open with candlelight flickering, like hearts beating in sync. On one porch, I watched letters burned one by one in a metal basin, love notes, I think, or confessions. No one seemed afraid except me. I found Jacob outside the old grocery store. He stood with his head tipped back, hand resting lightly on a cart handle, like he'd forgotten why he came. "Jacob," I said too loud, "come with me." He blinked slowly, then smiled that warm, distant smile. "Come where?" "Anywhere," I said. "Out of town. Just for a day. See if it breaks whatever this is." His smile stayed, but his eyes carried something like mourning. "Please," I said, I don't know what's happening, but it's not right. It's not. He stepped forward and put a hand on my shoulder. His face held real pain, sorrow for something I couldn't see, as if I was the one in the wrong. "You're not being punished, Aaron," he said gently. "You're just not part of it." That hurt worse than I expected, because there was no cruelty in it. Truth doesn't bruise, it carves. He went back inside, leaving me with nothing but insects buzzing in a rhythm I swear I'd never heard before. That night, I walked to the edge of town, to the overlook where grass turns to gravel, and you can watch the train tracks vanish into nothing. 2 people sat on the guardrail, a man and a woman I recognized. They'd never changed. They'd always been like me, watching from outside. They weren't talking. They held hands like it was the last rope tying them to the world. Then the woman started to cry, not pain, not fear, relief, and the man's mouth lifted, just barely, in the first edge of a smile that comes with surrendering to something beautiful you once feared. I watched, heart pounding, as they began to give in, and for the first time since it started, something split open in me, grief, because whatever they were becoming, it had never been meant for me. It happened just before dawn. I hadn't really slept in days, just drifted in and out like a body floating in cold water. I kept walking the streets, hoping movement would give my mind something to grip. When I reached Main Street, I knew the town had changed again. Everyone stood still, frozen mid-step, mid-breath, mid-conversation. A couple sat on a bench, foreheads touching. A teenager stood on a porch with a book half open. The mayor waited at a stoplight, car door ajar, head tipped toward the sky. No one moved. Their eyes were wide and wet. Their faces held the expression from old church paintings, mouths slightly parted, as if they were hearing something so beautiful they couldn't survive the sound. I stood in the square, surrounded. The air felt thick, vibrating just out of tune with reality. Pressure rang in my ears. Something was here. Then, in perfect unison, every head tilted upward. Not panic, recognition. Whatever they'd been waiting for had arrived. And then they began to bloom. It started as a shiver that rippled through the crowd, like a single held breath released. Shoulders softened, mouths opened, eyes gentled. Something pulled at them from very far away. Then the first tear opened. A man near the fountain split down the center of his chest, thin and precise, like a coat unzipping. No gasp, no struggle. His skin simply parted, easing back on its own, curling outward. Muscle followed in warm, glistening ribbons, peeling away from bone like silk, unwinding. It layered at his feet with soft, wet sounds. His heart sat exposed for a moment, pulsing like a bright stone. Then it softened too. All around me, bodies opened. I could hear it, quiet peeling, almost tender skin separating from what lived inside. Not violence, more like fruit being opened by steady hands. A woman's face split along the jaw, a child's spine pushed free in a slow arc, vertebra by vertebra. A man's arms shed muscle in draped sheets, revealing the pale gleam of bone. Tendons stretched like strings pulled taut, then snapped with little pops that sounded playful compared to what was happening. Fingers loosened from knuckles. Cheeks slid from skulls. Ribs unfolded like petals. There was no blood, not a drop. Everything emptied itself cleanly, quietly, as if the machinery of being human had shut off its alarms and unlocked every door. And their faces, God, their faces were ecstatic. A woman with eyes already clouding smiled like she'd just been told she could finally go home. A teenage boy leaned into his friend as his sternum opened, and they both laughed, breathless, relieved before the laughter thinned and vanished. Couples held hands while their bodies unspooled. Parents smoothed their children's hair, even as their own faces slipped away. Some closed their eyes. Others lifted their arms toward the sky like they were welcoming something descending. No one ran. No one begged. No one tried to stop it. They wanted it. Spines collapsed into soft white powder. Skulls folded inward like drying paper. Bones crumbled at the slightest breeze, becoming dust before they hit the ground. I stood there and watched Bellwether peel itself open and spill into the dawn like light, escaping a cracked shell. And what twisted inside me wasn't only horror. It was the unbearable fact threading through every smile, every sigh, every peaceful surrender. They were happy, all of them happy in a way I had never been. And suddenly, I understood that I never could be. That more than skin, more than bone, more than dust, was what broke me. Then something rose from the center of the stillness. At first, it was just a shimmer, like oil on water, like heat over pavement. Then wings, massive, translucent, veined like stained glass. A body flickering between forms I couldn't hold long enough to name. Eyes like many-faceted mirrors. A head that never stopped turning. It wasn't the butterfly from the painting. The butterfly had been a door. This was what had waited behind it. It rose from their remains, built from them somehow, not their flesh, but what had filled it. Love, family, partnership, desire. Everything shaped and refracted into something too beautiful to be real. It moved without sound, weightless, drifting over rooftops, and trailing gold sparks like the last light of a dying sun. It passed above me and did not touch me, didn't even pause. I stood and shouted. "I'm here," I shouted. "I'm still here." It didn't slow. I saw, I said. I watched, I understand. Still nothing. I dropped to my knees, coughing in the dust. Flecks of bone and ash clung to my skin like snow. I tried to cry, but nothing came. I tried to pray, but my voice was empty. I tried to plead, but I had no one to plead for, only myself. And then it hit all at once. The quiet years, the polite dinners, the acceptable small talk, every chance I'd had to love someone, to need someone, to ache, and how I'd missed them all. I collapsed fully into the ash. Into the remains of 1,000 opened hearts, I whispered, "I'm still here. I'm still me." Why, the dust stirred, just barely, and I heard it not from the sky, but from inside, as if something in the back of my skull had cracked wide enough to let words in. Because there's nothing in you to transform. Then the wind rose, and the ashes of the people I never learned how to love scattered into mourning. They found me 3 days later, still sitting in the square, half buried in ash. It had had settled into my hair, into my clothes, into the cracks of my palms. I don't think I moved. Maybe I slept. Maybe I didn't. Time blurs when no one is left to tell you it's passing. Rescue crews arrived, boots crunching through what used to be neighbors, classmates, the people I'd borrowed jumper cables from. I didn't react. A man knelt in front of me and asked questions, my name, if I was hurt, what I remembered, but his voice sounded muffled, like it came from underwater. I kept staring at the ground. Each breath shifted the dust into small clouds that lifted, swirled, and settled again. If I stared long enough, I could almost see faces in it, not their faces exactly, but the impression of all the love they'd carried, hovering a moment before dissolving. Eventually, someone asked, "What happened here?" I could have lied. I could have said I didn't know, but the truth rose before I could stop it. "They were loved," I said, my voice cracking. "That's why they got to leave." The man frowned, hearing nonsense. Maybe it was nonsense, but it was the only explanation left that fit. They weren't killed. They became what they'd always been reaching toward. And I didn't. Afterward, they kept me in a hospital an hour outside town, clean sheets, tiled floors, a window over fields that had never known what happened in Bellwether. Nurses came and went. A psychiatrist sat at my bedside and tried to talk about trauma and mass hysteria. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Alice's smile opening like a second sunrise. Jacob lifting his head as if greeting an old friend. Couples holding each other as their bodies unwound into light. They weren't afraid. They weren't alone. They weren't left behind. That last one hurt the most. Because beneath the horror and the dust and the gnawing quiet, something else took root in me, something I didn't want to say out loud. I was jealous. Jealous that they had someone, anyone, whose love reached deep enough to echo into whatever came next. I didn't. And that was why I remained. People keep calling me lucky. They say I survived, that I was spared. But every night, when the lights dim, I lie awake and circle the contradiction until it bleeds. If they're gone and I'm alive, then I've been given another chance at love. But if I never had it to begin with, if no one ever felt that way about me, and I never felt it toward anyone, then what does a second chance even mean? And if I did learn it, if I finally grew the thing in me that everyone else seemed born with, would I be lifted into the sky too? Or was it a one-time opening, a door that slammed shut behind them? Some mornings, I hope for answers. Other mornings, I hope I never get them, because the world feels wrong with this knowledge, too flat, too quiet, as if someone drained the color or switched off the part of the sky that used to watch back. And when I'm honest, I wonder if they were the lucky ones, the ones who got to bloom, the ones who got to go, the ones who weren't left behind, trying to learn how to love in a world that suddenly feels too big, too empty, and too late. But I'm still here. I'm still me. Maybe that means something. Maybe it means nothing at all.